Every evening, just as the sun begins to soften and the sky turns a quiet shade of gold, the neighborhood settles into its familiar rhythm. Porch lights flicker on one by one. Distant laughter drifts through open windows. It's the kind of peaceful hour where nothing feels rushed, and everything feels gently in place. That's when the dog appears. He trots down the sidewalk with calm determination, his paws steady, his breath even. In his mouth is a simple stick, smooth, worn, and clearly not new. It's almost as long as his shoulder, held carefully, as if dropping it is not an option. He doesn't stop to sniff. He doesn't chase sounds. His eyes stay forward, focused, as though this small ritual matters deeply. The first time, the human watching from the porch smiles and thinks nothing of it. Dogs carry sticks all the time. But the next evening, the dog returns, with the same stick. Same pace. Same careful grip. The following day, again. Rain or shine, the pattern holds. Curiosity slowly replaces coincidence. Why this stick? Why every single day? The human begins to wait for him, leaning forward just a little when footsteps approach. There's something about the way the dog carries it, not playful, not excited, but gentle. Purposeful. Almost respectful. When their eyes meet, the dog pauses briefly, tail still, as if acknowledging something unspoken before continuing home. A quiet feeling settles in the observer's chest. This isn't random. This isn't habit. This is meaning. And whatever the dog sensed in that simple piece of wood would turn out to be more beautiful than anyone imagined. The evening always arrived the same way. Not loudly. Not suddenly. It slipped in slowly, like a soft breath after a long day. Sunlight stretched low across the street, turning ordinary houses warm and golden. Porch lights blinked on, one by one. Somewhere down the block, a radio hummed quietly. A lawn sprinkler clicked in a steady rhythm. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Just life, settling. From the porch, the man sat with his hands wrapped around a warm mug, letting the quiet do what it always did: loosen his shoulders, slow his thoughts. Evening was his favorite time. The day no longer asked for anything. That's when he noticed movement at the far end of the sidewalk. A dog. Medium-sized. Golden brown fur, slightly darker along the ears. Not rushed. Not wandering. Purposeful. The dog walked straight down the sidewalk, head level, steps calm and even. His tail didn't wag wildly, it swayed, slow and balanced, matching his pace. And in his mouth, a stick. Not a new one. Not the kind dogs usually grab in excitement. This one was smooth. Weathered. Pale along the edges, darker in the middle, like it had been held many times before. The dog carried it carefully, angled just right, as if he'd learned exactly how to keep it from dragging. The man smiled faintly. Dogs love sticks. Everyone knew that. The dog passed the porch without looking up, paws tapping softly against the pavement. No sniffing. No stopping. Just steady movement toward the small house at the corner. The moment passed. The man leaned back, took a sip of coffee, and let the thought drift away. The next evening, the same quiet hour returned. Golden light. Cooling air. The familiar settling of the neighborhood. And again. The dog appeared. Same direction. Same pace. Same stick. The man paused mid-sip this time. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing not with suspicion, but curiosity. The dog's grip was identical. Careful. Centered. Almost practiced. He watched as the dog crossed the street, pausing briefly to let a car pass, then continuing on, never dropping the stick. Not once. Ha, the man murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The dog reached the corner house, slipped through the gate, and disappeared from view. A coincidence, the man told himself. Patterns only felt special when humans looked too closely. But on the third evening, the man didn't even realize he was waiting. He found himself sitting earlier than usual, eyes drifting toward the far end of the sidewalk without thinking about why. The mud warmed his hands, but his attention was already elsewhere. And right on time. There he was. The dog. Same golden fur catching the sunset. Same calm trot. Same stick. The man felt something shift, not sharply, not urgently, just enough to notice. The dog didn't treat the stick like a toy. No shaking. No playful growling. It rested gently between his jaws, held with intention. His eyes stayed forward, focused, as though this short walk mattered more than anything else happening around him. As the dog passed the porch this time, he slowed. Just slightly. His eyes lifted. For half a second, they met. The man felt it, a quiet awareness, like someone knocking softly on a door inside his chest. The dog's gaze wasn't asking for attention. It wasn't fearful or excited. It was present. Then the dog continued on. The moment lingered after he was gone. That night, the man found himself thinking about it while washing dishes. About the way the dog held that stick. About the steadiness in his walk. About that look. It wasn't curiosity that stayed with him. It was intention. The fourth evening came with clouds, the sky tinted soft gray instead of gold. A light breeze moved fallen leaves along the curb. The man stepped onto the porch out of habit now. He didn't tell himself why. He just waited. And sure enough, the dog appeared, fur rippling slightly in the breeze. The stick was darker tonight, damp from somewhere, maybe a yard, maybe a park. But it was unmistakably the same one. The man stood this time. As the dog passed, he spoke without thinking. "Evenin', buddy." His voice was calm. Low. Friendly. The dog stopped. Not startled. Not cautious. He stood there with the stick still in his mouth, tail still, eyes lifted. They looked at each other again. Up close, the man noticed small details, a tiny notch near the stick's end, teeth marks that had been worn smooth over time. The dog's jaw held it gently, like something fragile. Well, the man added quietly, unsure why he felt the need to keep talking, "You sure don't let that thing go." The dog's ears shifted slightly. No bark. No movement. Then, with a slow blink, he turned and continued toward home. The man stayed there long after the gate closed behind him. The air felt different now. Not heavier. Just fuller. By the fifth evening, the man brought no mug. He leaned against the porch railing, hands resting on the wood, eyes already scanning the sidewalk before the sun fully dipped. This time, when the dog appeared, the man felt it clearly. This wasn't coincidence. This was a ritual. And whatever that stick meant to the dog, whatever memory or instinct guided those steady steps, it mattered. The dog carried it not for play, but for a reason. And soon, that reason would quietly make itself known. By the sixth evening, the man no longer questioned his own behavior. He expected the dog now. The sky was clear again, washed in soft orange and pale blue. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and distant dinners cooking. Somewhere nearby, a screen door closed gently. The man rested his forearms on the porch railing and waited. And right on time. There he was. The dog appeared at the far end of the sidewalk, framed by the last stretch of sunlight. His fur glowed briefly before evening pulled the color down into something softer, calmer. Same pace. Same posture. Same stick. But tonight, the man noticed something new. The stick wasn't random. It wasn't crooked or jagged. It wasn't freshly broken. One end was worn smooth, rounded almost gently, while the other showed faint grooves, old tooth marks layered over time. This stick had history. The dog walked past a patch of grass where broken twigs lay scattered from a recent storm. He didn't glance at them. Didn't slow. He passed a yard where a tennis ball rested near the fence, bright and tempting. Nothing. His attention never shifted. The man followed a few steps behind this time, not close enough to intrude, just enough to observe. He felt slightly foolish doing it, like he was breaking some quiet rule. But curiosity had already taken hold. The dog turned down the corner street toward the small house. As he walked, his grip adjusted subtly, a careful repositioning, as if he knew exactly how much pressure to apply. Too tight, and it might crack. Too loose, and it could fall. The man stopped at the sidewalk's edge and watched as the dog slipped through the familiar gate. Again. Later that night, the man sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp glowing nearby. He thought about his own routines, the way humans held onto things simply because they mattered. A watch that no longer worked. A chipped mug no one else would use. A photograph tucked into a drawer. Objects didn't have to be valuable to be important. They just had to mean something. The next evening came with a light drizzle. The man almost stayed inside. Almost. But something pulled him back to the porch, not urgency, not excitement, just a quiet need to see. Rain dotted the sidewalk, turning the pavement darker, reflective. The neighborhood felt hushed, wrapped in soft sound. And then the dog appeared again. His fur was damp now, darker along his back, ears slicked gently against his head. The stick was wet too, its surface shining faintly under the streetlight. Still, he carried it the same way. Careful. Centered. The man watched as the dog slowed slightly near a puddle, stepping around it with deliberate precision. He could have dropped the stick, adjusted, picked it up again. He didn't. Instead, he altered his stride, protecting it. That's when the realization settled in. The dog wasn't finding the stick each evening. He was choosing it. Every time. The man spoke softly, not wanting to break whatever calm existed between them. That one again, huh? The dog paused. Rain tapped lightly on leaves nearby. A car passed slowly, tires whispering against wet asphalt. The dog lifted his eyes. This time, he stepped closer. Close enough that the man could see the stick clearly, the smoothness worn by years, the faint curve that fit perfectly between the dog's jaws. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't special to look at. But the way the dog held it made it feel sacred. Must be important, the man said quietly. The dog didn't respond, not with sound, not with movement. But his tail swayed once. Slow. Measured. Then he turned and continued home. The man stayed on the porch long after. Rain dampened the wood beneath his hands, but he didn't move. His thoughts drifted back to things he himself had carried through life, not physically, but emotionally. Promises. Memories. Losses that never quite left. Dogs were simple creatures, people said. But nothing about that dog felt simple. The following afternoon, the man took a longer walk than usual. Not intentionally. He just wandered. His feet carried him toward the small park a few blocks away, a modest place with a bench, a tired oak tree, and a narrow dirt path worn smooth by years of use. Near the tree, he saw it. A pile of sticks. Broken branches. Fresh ones. Old ones. All shapes and sizes scattered across the ground. And right beside them, a spot where one was missing. The ground there was darker, pressed down slightly, like something had been lifted from it over and over again. The man stood still. He could picture it now. The dog returning to this place. Selecting the same stick. Ignoring all others. Day after day. The realization didn't hit like a wave. It settled gently, like understanding does when it finally arrives. That stick wasn't just a stick. It was his. That evening, the man waited again. When the dog appeared, the man felt something like respect. The dog walked past, steady and calm, carrying his chosen object with quiet dignity. And for the first time, the man didn't wonder why the dog did it. He wondered what it meant. Whatever story lived inside that simple piece of wood. It wasn't about play. It was about memory. And the man knew now. He was standing at the edge of something tender. Something that would soon ask him to listen. By the time the next week arrived, the man had stopped pretending this was accidental. The waiting had become part of his evenings. Not scheduled. Not planned. Just expected. He found himself finishing tasks a little earlier, stepping onto the porch before the sun had fully dipped, eyes drifting naturally toward the far end of the sidewalk. The neighborhood still felt the same, calm, familiar, but his awareness had sharpened. He was looking now. Listening. The evening air carried soft sounds, wind brushing leaves, a distant dog barking once and falling quiet, the low murmur of conversation drifting from an open window. Then, footsteps. Not loud. Not hurried. The dog appeared right on cue. Golden fur catching the last light. Steady gait. Stick held gently, precisely, exactly where it always was. The man exhaled without realizing he'd been holding his breath. There you are. Tonight, instead of staying on the porch, he stepped down onto the walkway. Not toward the dog, just closer. Close enough to feel involved without intruding. As the dog approached, the man noticed small changes he'd missed before. The dog's eyes flicked briefly toward the houses. Toward parked cars. Toward movement. Always aware. Always calm. And yet, when it came to the stick, nothing distracted him. The world could move around him, sounds, smells, motion, and still, that single object remained his priority. When the dog reached the porch, the man spoke again. Softly. You never forget it, do you? The dog slowed. Not stopping this time, just easing his pace. His ears shifted slightly, listening. His grip adjusted, just enough to keep the stick balanced. The man crouched down, keeping space between them. Up close, he could see the fine details now, faint gray around the dog's muzzle, the relaxed confidence in his posture, the way his chest rose and fell evenly. This was no young dog. This was someone with years behind him. You must have carried the thing a long time, the man said, voice almost a whisper. The dog paused. For a moment, neither moved. The stick rested between them, not offered, not guarded, simply present. Then the dog gave a slow blink. And in that blink, the man felt it. Trust. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that begged for affection. The quiet kind. After that night, the man began noticing the dog beyond the ritual. During the day, he'd catch glimpses of him in the yard, lying beneath the shade of a tree, stick resting nearby. Not chewed. Not played with. Placed. Sometimes, the dog would nudge it gently with his nose. Then settle again. The man watched from a distance, pretending to check his phone, feeling oddly protective of the quiet moment he was witnessing. Other neighbors passed. Children laughed. Bikes rolled by. Life continued. But the dog never reacted. His attention always drifted back to that same stick. One afternoon, curiosity nudged the man further than before. He found himself standing near the fence that separated their yards. Not leaning over. Not calling out. Just present. The dog lifted his head and noticed him. They held eye contact. The man smiled gently. "That thing must be pretty special," he said. The dog didn't move, but his tail gave a small, slow sway, the kind that didn't ask for anything, didn't invite play. Just acknowledgement. The man noticed something else then. The dog never carried the stick away from home. Only toward it. That detail settled into place quietly, like a puzzle piece finding its match. This wasn't about adventure. It was about return. That evening, the sky glowed a deeper amber than usual. The air felt thicker, heavy with warmth that lingered after sunset. The man waited. The dog arrived. But tonight, instead of passing straight by, the dog paused directly in front of the porch. He stood there, looking up. Stick still held carefully. The man felt his chest tighten, not with fear, not with excitement, but with a sense of being invited into something. He didn't reach out. Didn't speak. He simply waited. The dog held his gaze for a long moment, then turned slowly and continued on his way. The man remained where he was, heart beating just a little faster. That pause had meant something. He didn't know what yet. But curiosity had crossed a line. It was no longer about observing a habit. It was about understanding a bond. A story that hadn't been spoken, but was clearly being carried. And the man knew now. Whatever lay ahead, it would ask for patience. And care. Something shifted after the pause. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But quietly, like a door left slightly open. The man didn't tell himself he was becoming part of the dog's routine. He just noticed that, somehow, he already was. The evenings continued, one folding gently into the next. The neighborhood remained familiar, but the moments between the dog and the man began to stretch, linger, soften. One evening, the sky was streaked with thin clouds, pale pink fading into gray. The man stood at the porch rail as usual, hands resting on the wood. The dog appeared on schedule. Same calm stride. Same gentle grip on the stick. But when he reached the porch this time, he didn't slow. He stopped. Right there. The man felt his breath catch, not sharply, just enough to notice. He didn't move. Didn't speak. The dog stood still, eyes level with the man's knees. The stick remained balanced in his mouth, angled slightly downward now, like he was resting its weight. Seconds passed. The world continued around them, a car rolling by, leaves shifting in the breeze, but the space between man and dog felt set apart. Then, slowly, the dog lowered his head. Not enough to drop the stick. Just enough to bring it closer to the ground. The man understood immediately. Not an offering. Not a request. An acknowledgement. "You take good care of it," the man said quietly. The dog's ears tilted back just slightly. He lifted his head again and resumed his walk, leaving the man with a strange warmth blooming behind his ribs. From then on, their exchanges followed no rules. Some evenings, the dog passed without stopping, offering only a glance. Other nights, he slowed, lingered, waited for the man's presence before continuing. The man learned not to expect consistency. This wasn't a performance. It was trust unfolding at its own pace. One night, the man brought a folding chair onto the porch. He sat, not watching directly, just existing in the same space. The dog arrived. Paused. Then walked closer than ever before. Close enough that the man could hear his breathing. Calm. Even. Steady. The stick's surface was worn smooth, polished by time and careful jaws. The man noticed faint discoloration near the center, a darker band where it had been held countless times. "You've had that a long time, haven't you?" the man said. The dog blinked slowly. Once. Then twice. The man felt it again, that quiet confirmation that didn't need words. Days passed. The man began noticing the dog's moods in subtle ways. On cooler evenings, the dog's pace slowed slightly, steps more deliberate. On warmer nights, his tail swayed just a bit more. But the stick never changed. It was always there. Always carried home. One afternoon, a neighbor approached while the man stood near the fence. "That your dog?" the neighbor asked casually. The man shook his head. "No. Just a friend, I guess." The neighbor smiled politely and walked on. But the word stayed. Friend. That evening, something new happened. As the dog reached the porch, he stopped and shifted the stick slightly, turning it so one end rested gently against the edge of the porch step. Not dropped. Not offered. Placed. The man's chest tightened. He leaned forward just a little, careful not to startle him. "That okay there?" he asked softly. The dog looked at the stick, then back at the man. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the dog lifted it again and held it in his mouth. But the message had been delivered. The man smiled, not wide, not loud, just enough to feel it. "I see you," he said quietly. The dog's tail moved once. Slow. Measured. Then he continued home. That night, the man lay in bed longer than usual, replaying the small moments in his mind. The pauses. The glances. The careful way the dog treated that stick, like something that held weight beyond wood and bark. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't habit. This was connection. Not the kind that demanded attention or affection. The kind that formed when two beings recognized something shared, even if neither fully understood it yet. The next evening, the man stepped onto the porch before the sun began to fade. When the dog appeared, the man didn't watch with curiosity anymore. He watched with care. Because somewhere along the way, the dog had led him close. And whatever story lived inside that ritual, it was no longer carried alone. The man began noticing things he might have missed before. Not big things. Not obvious ones. Small details, the kind that only appear when you're paying attention with your whole heart. The dog's routine never changed, same path, same timing, but the way he moved spoke volumes now. His steps slowed near the corner where the sidewalk dipped slightly. His head lifted near the old oak tree. His grip tightened just a touch whenever a sudden sound cut through the air. Always protecting the stick. One evening, the man arrived home later than usual. The sun had already slipped behind the houses, leaving the street washed in soft blue-gray light. He felt a quiet disappointment. He'd missed him. But just as he turned toward the door, he heard the gentle tap of paws. The dog emerged from the shadows, illuminated briefly by a street lamp. The stick caught the light, revealing something the man hadn't seen before. A faint carving. Not words. Not symbols. Just shallow grooves, uneven, imperfect, like marks made long ago by small hands or careful fingers. They wrapped loosely around one end, softened by time. The man felt his breath slow. That wasn't from teeth. That was from touch. The dog paused near the porch, letting the stick rest lightly against the ground again. This time, the man crouched lower, keeping his movements slow, respectful. "You didn't make those," he said gently. The dog watched him. No tension. No warning. Just awareness. The man didn't reach for the stick. He only looked. Studied the worn surface, the places where the wood darkened with age, the faint scent of earth clinging to it even now. "How long have you been carrying it?" he whispered. The dog's tail swayed once. Over the next few days, the man began walking more. Longer routes. Slower paces. He found himself scanning the ground near the park, near the oak tree, near the narrow dirt path. He noticed a bench tucked beneath low branches, weathered and used. Beside it, the earth was worn smooth. Footprints, old ones, layered beneath newer marks. Small feet. Light steps. The man sat on the bench and closed his eyes. He imagined a child there, laughing softly, holding a stick, offering it to a dog who waited patiently. The image didn't feel forced. It felt remembered. That evening, when the dog arrived, his pace was slower than usual. Not tired. Not uncertain. Reflective. The man stood quietly, letting the moment unfold without words. The dog paused in front of him and looked up longer than he ever had before. The stick rested between them again. But this time, the dog gently nudged it forward. Just an inch. The man's chest tightened. "I won't take it," he said softly. "I know it's not mine." The dog didn't pull it back. He simply stood there, waiting. The man reached out, not to grab, but to touch the very end of the stick with 2 fingers. It was smooth. Warm from the dog's breath. Real. The dog didn't flinch. The man pulled his hand back after a moment, nodding slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. The dog lifted the stick again and continued home. That night, the man understood something important. The stick wasn't just an object. It was a bridge. Between past and present. Between memory and movement. The dog wasn't carrying it out of habit. He was carrying it forward. And now, he was allowing someone else to see it. The next afternoon, the man stopped by the corner house for the first time. He didn't knock. He didn't peek through windows. He simply stood near the gate and listened. Wind through leaves. A quiet yard. The soft sound of a dog shifting inside. On the ground near the door, a second stick lay untouched. Newer. Rougher. Ignored. The man felt a lump rise in his throat. Some things couldn't be replaced. That evening, as the dog walked home beneath a sky washed with lavender and gray, the man waited, not with curiosity anymore, not even with care, but with understanding. The pieces were forming now. Not loudly. Not all at once. But gently. And the man knew. The truth was close. Not hidden. Just waiting for the right moment to be felt. The evening arrived quieter than usual. No radios playing. No distant laughter. Just the soft hush of air moving through trees and the faint hum of a streetlight warming up for the night. The man stood on the porch, hands resting loosely at his sides. He wasn't waiting with questions anymore. He was waiting with readiness. When the dog appeared, his pace was slower than it had ever been. Not heavy. Not tired. Intentional. The stick was there, of course, held with the same careful balance, but tonight, something about the dog felt inward. His ears were relaxed. His eyes softer, reflective. As he reached the porch, he stopped. Longer than before. The man didn't speak. The dog looked up, then gently turned his head toward the corner house, just enough to invite attention. Then he looked back at the man. A choice. The man felt it settle deep inside his chest. "You want me to follow?" he asked quietly. The dog didn't move. He blinked once, then stepped forward. The man followed at a respectful distance, heart steady, steps slow. They moved together down the sidewalk, not side by side, but connected by awareness. The gate at the corner house creaked softly as the dog nudged it open. Inside the yard, the air felt different. Still. Tender. The dog walked toward the back, where a small tree stood near a patch of bare earth. He lowered his head and placed the stick carefully at its base. Not dropped. Placed. The man stopped a few steps away. He didn't need to be closer. He already understood. Near the tree was a small marker, simple, weathered, nearly hidden by grass. Not a gravestone. Not official. Just a flat stone, with a name carved shallowly into its surface. The man swallowed. He didn't read it out loud. He didn't need to. The dog sat beside the tree, tail resting against the ground. He didn't look at the marker. He looked at the stick. The man felt the truth unfold, not like a reveal, but like a memory returning to where it belonged. This was a child's stick. Chosen once, and never forgotten. The dog hadn't been carrying it home. He'd been carrying it back. Every evening. To this place. To this moment. The man crouched slowly, placing his hand on the ground, not touching anything else. Just being there. You've been keeping it safe, he said softly. The dog exhaled a long, steady breath and rested his head briefly against the tree's trunk. The man felt tears rise, not sharply, not overwhelmingly, just enough to blur the world gently. You remembered, he whispered. The dog stayed still. The stick lay where it always belonged. They didn't stay long. They didn't need to. The dog stood, gave the stick one final nudge to straighten it, then turned toward the house. The man followed him back to the gate. At the threshold, the dog paused and looked up once more. Not asking. Thanking. The man nodded. Any time, he said. The gate closed softly behind them. The man walked back to his porch under a sky deepening into blue, his steps slower now, heavier with meaning, but lighter with understanding. That night, he slept with the window open. The air felt full. Complete. Because sometimes, the greatest connections aren't made through words. They're made through patience. Through presence. Through noticing. And the man knew now. The dog hadn't been asking to be seen. He had simply been waiting. For someone to understand. The next evening felt different before it even began. The sky was pale and clear, the kind of quiet dusk that seemed to pause the world for just a moment longer than usual. The man stood on his porch, but not with anticipation. With reverence. When the dog appeared, he wasn't carrying the stick. The man noticed immediately. His chest tightened not with fear, not with worry, but with a tender awareness that something meaningful was about to unfold. The dog walked the same path. Same pace. Same calm presence. But his mouth was empty. When he reached the porch, he stopped and looked up. The man felt his breath catch. It's okay, he said softly, unsure why the words came. You don't have to carry it every time. The dog blinked. Slow. Gentle. Then he turned his head toward the yard again. The man followed. Inside the yard, the tree stood quietly, its leaves barely moving. At its base, the stick rested where it had been placed the night before, straightened, protected, untouched. The dog walked to it and sat. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. The man stood beside him, hands loosely folded, heart open. That was theirs, wasn't it? He asked quietly. The dog didn't respond. But he leaned just slightly until his shoulder brushed the man's leg. That was answer enough. The man remembered the bench by the oak tree. The worn ground. The small footprints. He imagined afternoons spent tossing that stick, not far, not hard, just enough for laughter to follow. A dog waiting patiently, never rushing, always returning it gently. Then, one day, the game ended. But the love didn't. The dog had taken on the responsibility alone. Carrying memory home, day after day, until it felt right to set it down again. You kept it alive, the man whispered. The dog exhaled, slow and deep. For the first time since the man had known him, the dog lay down beside the tree resting, not watching. At peace. The following days brought small changes. The dog still walked in the evenings, still followed the same path, but now, sometimes, he stopped at the porch even when the man wasn't outside. Sometimes, he paused under the oak tree. Sometimes, he simply watched the sky. The man noticed the dog slept more deeply during the day, stretched out beneath the tree instead of guarding the stick nearby. The ritual had softened. Not disappeared. Just transformed. One afternoon, the man met a neighbor tending flowers near the fence. "Good dog," the neighbor said kindly. "Belonged to a little boy. Lost him a few years back." The man nodded. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. That evening, the dog arrived with something new. Not a stick. A leaf. Large. Golden. Dry. He carried it briefly, then dropped it near the porch steps, not carefully, not protectively, just playfully. The man laughed quietly. "I think I like this version of you," he said. The dog's tail wagged, faster this time. The weight had lifted. Not because the past was forgotten, but because it had been honored. As the sun faded and the sky darkened, the man sat on the porch while the dog rested in the yard, eyes half closed. The stick remained beneath the tree. Not abandoned. Remembered. And the man understood now. The dog hadn't been clinging to grief. He had been carrying love. Until it was safe to let it rest. The evenings returned to their quiet rhythm. The same streets. The same soft light. The same gentle settling of the neighborhood as day eased into night. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. The man still stepped onto the porch at dusk, though now he didn't scan the sidewalk with the same wondering eyes. He simply stood there, breathing in the calm, letting the moment arrive as it wished. And the dog still came. Some nights he walked the path with his familiar steady pace. Other nights, he lingered in the yard, resting beneath the tree, eyes half closed as the breeze moved through the leaves above him. The stick stayed where it belonged. At the base of the tree. It darkened slowly with time, weather softening its edges even more. Leaves sometimes gathered around it, as if the ground itself understood its importance. The man would glance at it whenever he passed the gate. Always with respect. One evening, as the sky turned a soft shade of lavender, the dog padded over to the porch without anything in his mouth. He sat near the steps, close but not pressing. The man sat down beside him. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The dog watched the street while the man watched the sky. A quiet companionship settled between them, the kind that didn't ask questions, didn't fill silence. It simply existed. "You did good," the man said after a while. The dog's tail moved gently against the ground. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted almost imperceptibly. Leaves thinned on the trees. Air cooled. Shadows stretched longer in the evenings. The dog grew grayer around the muzzle. The man noticed. He noticed everything now. Sometimes children from down the block would stop near the fence, watching the dog with curiosity. He would lift his head, tail wagging slowly, calm and patient. No stick. Just presence. One afternoon, the man returned from the store and saw something that made him pause. A small hand-drawn picture was tucked carefully into the fence near the tree. Crayon lines. A stick. A dog. And the sun overhead. The man smiled. The dog lay nearby, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. The past hadn't disappeared. It had simply found new ground to rest in. That evening, the man stood on the porch as the sky dimmed. The dog walked the familiar path unburdened now, stopping briefly to look back before heading home. The man raised a hand in quiet greeting. The dog held his gaze for a moment, then continued on. No pause needed. No ritual required. Because some stories don't end. They settle. They soften. They become part of the air we breathe without noticing. And long after the evenings grew quiet again, anyone who passed that small tree would feel it. Not sadness. Not loss. But love, carried gently, until it was safe to let go.